We want to take you to Capitol Hill now, where House Speaker Mike Johnson is addressing the Senate's move to dismiss both articles of impeachment against Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Let's listen in.
Able to see the evidence and evaluate for themselves what I think they know already intuitively, and that is that Secretary Mayorkas had a fantastical breach of duty. I mean, he breached his constitutional responsibility. He's openly defied the federal law on immigration and the will of Congress. In my view, he has lied on multiple occasions to Congress under oath, and I think he's done it to me when I used to serve on the House Judiciary Committee. In my view, I believe, my evaluation is he's probably the least effective and I think most dangerous in terms of his policy implementations of any cabinet secretary in the history of the United States. And if there's ever been a cabinet secretary that deserved to be impeached, he is that. And the idea that the Senate and under Chuck Schumer's leadership voted on party lines to not even allow the American people to evaluate the evidence is shameful. I think it's a violation of their constitutional responsibility. And I think there'll be a reckoning for all this in the election cycle in the fall. I really do. The American people know, and all the polling confirms what we know, that the American people understand the open border is by design. It was designed by this administration. They did this intentionally. These are policy choices. It began on the first day that Joe Biden took office. And we documented in the House 64 specific executive actions, from executive orders that he took to actions that Secretary Mayorkas implemented that opened that border wide. And that is what's led to this catastrophe, and that is why we're in such dire straits. We have, by our estimates, probably 16 million illegals that have come across that border since Joe Biden took office. 16 million people. The official number is a little over 9 million encounters at the border. We know that includes at least 340 suspects on the terrorism watch list that were encountered at the border. But the dangerous thing, the scary thing to a lot of American people is we don't know how many terrorists came in totally undetected. We know we've got over 2 million, probably close to 3 million gotaways that have been documented, but we don't know who's come in over those open, completely unpatrolled sectors of the border. On January 3rd, we took 64 House Republicans down to the border, and it was the largest congressional trip ever. And what we saw at Eagle Pass, the Del Rio sector, which was ground zero at the time, was just maddening. It was infuriating. It was heartbreaking all at the same time because of the humanitarian catastrophe that has been created there. And they estimated down there, and they told us, the Border Patrol agents and the officials who were in charge said, by their estimation, 60 to 70% of the people that cross that border at the Del Rio sector are single adult males between the ages of 18 and 45 of military capability. We have no idea what they're planning, but we assume that there are terrorism cells set up around the country, maybe in a community nearby. And every American is concerned about this, and every state is a border state. And here's the important point. The American people, by the polling confirms, also know that Joe Biden has the executive authority right now, and he has since day one, to solve that catastrophe, to end it. Because it's policy choices that got us into that, and it's policy choices that can get us out. He could use Section 212F of the Immigration Nationality Act, issue an executive order, and close the border. He has unilateral authority. The president can determine if it's in the country's best interest to do that. He can shut it down, and he won't. I've asked him myself repeatedly. I've shown him the law. I've read him the provision of the law, and he won't use it. He's got an array. He's got a menu of options. I sent him that in paperwork as well. Mr. President, here's 8 or 9 things you can do right now to solve this problem. He won't do it. I can't answer for that. He'll have to. I think he'll answer the American people in November, and I think that's one of the big reasons that the Republicans are going to have a very, very good election cycle. I believe we're going to grow the House majority. I believe we're going to win the White House and the Senate as well. The other big thing going on, of course, is the supplemental. So
You've been listening to House Speaker Mike Johnson discuss the Senate rejecting both articles of impeachment against Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. He said the secretary deserves to be impeached and tried in the Senate. The speaker also criticized Senate Democrats for, in his view, moving too quickly to dismiss these impeachment articles. He called it, quote, disgraceful. Scott MacFarlane joins us now from Capitol Hill, our congressional correspondent. Scott, thanks for being here. You've been doing terrific reporting on this all day. Now that this is gone from the Senate, what next for the House GOP?
Their next order of business is the one the House Speaker is about to start discussing, which is getting money for Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific region, and potentially getting it approved by Saturday. This long-awaited, long-stalled aid package, to get it through the finish line, he's going to have to navigate those treacherous political waters he's been navigating for months now. That narrow House majority, 2 members of whom have been championing this effort to oust him from the speakership. What he's going to do is find a pathway to get separate votes on Ukraine, separate vote on Israel, separate vote on the Indo-Pacific region aid, but also at some point offer another border security bill, likely with some heavy Republican priorities in it to help satisfy that restive member of his House Republican conference. All of this is a needle he's going to try to thread over the next few days, but he won himself some goodwill with his fellow Republicans, Bob, by launching through in February this impeachment effort, which culminated today in a 3-hour proceeding at the U.S. Senate, which was mostly an intramural argument over procedures, not about the border.
Scott, he may have won himself some goodwill from House Republicans who seem to have grumbling as part of their job description when it comes to the speakership. But he just made a claim in this news conference that there's Democrats are somehow going to pay a price for dismissing these articles of impeachment in the Senate. Yet when I'm out on the campaign trail, I don't encounter many voters as a reporter who even know respectfully who this secretary is. Alejandro Mayorkas is not a prominent national figure in the eyes of many voters. Is there really a belief behind the scenes among Republicans you're talking to on Capitol Hill that this entire process will in some way have a political dividend for the GOP?
That's a great question. There is a consistent argument from Republicans. This is the terrain they want to fight on in November. Issues of border security, the migrant crisis, immigration, not issues involving women's reproductive rights, not issues involving the future of democracy. They want to talk about the border. This gave them a platform today to do so, admittedly a platform that was smaller potentially than they hoped. But we have seen a beta test, haven't we? In early February, there was that special election in New York to replace the expelled Congressman George Santos, a real purple district, a real competitive district, and the Democrat, Tom Suozzi, instead of letting himself be vulnerable to arguments about immigration, ran ads saying he's been championing, trying to pass solutions for the border, tried to take over the issue and use it for himself. And he won by a larger margin than expected. Democrats have made this case. They think they can utilize border issues and neutralize it as a weapon because they say Republicans have been the ones shooting down border compromises that have come out of the U.S. Senate. That's really the test moving now between April and November, is how much of a tool is the border, is something like the impeachment of the Homeland Security Secretary for Republicans if they want to win back the Senate, extend their margins in the House, and of course win back the White House.
Scott, we keep hearing about Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, the threat, the specter of this so-called motion to vacate, to take out yet another speaker. The same move was used procedurally, as we all know, against the predecessor of the speaker, Californian Kevin McCarthy. That's always the issue on Capitol Hill, the ups and downs of the speakership. But what about the issue of Ukraine aid? Is the package being put forward, the substance of this issue, as a war goes on between Ukraine and Russia? Is this package of aid considered sufficient by those allies of Ukraine in Congress, both Republicans and Democrats?
The Democrats with whom I spoke this afternoon, Bob, said they're bullish on the prospects of this Ukraine bill and the rest of the package as well. Dan Goldman, Democrat from New York, predicted it would get 300+ votes if put on the floor of the U.S. House. Does it satisfy the other issue that you mentioned for Speaker Johnson, that Marjorie Taylor Greene not only is trying to challenge his job, asking him to resign or threatening to oust him, but it's Ukraine money that has been her red line? That her most fervent argument is that she doesn't want him putting forward a vote to fund Ukraine, which is what he's done today. Set a path towards getting a funding bill past the finish line on Ukraine. Now, he may have navigated the treacherous political waters by finding a bill that could pass the House and could pass the Senate and has already gotten a statement of support from the White House. But that may do nothing to end the challenge on his job.
Scott MacFarlane talking to everybody on Capitol Hill, bringing us the latest from his reporting. Thank you very much, Scott. We appreciate it. Weijia Jiang joins us now from the White House, the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue. What's the White House's reaction, Weijia, to what's going on with this Mayorkas impeachment process as well as the aid packages moving forward?
Well, as far as the impeachment, Robert, we just got a statement from the White House counsel's office, from Ian Sams, a spokesperson, and he says once and for all, the Senate has rightly voted down this baseless impeachment that even conservative legal scholars said was unconstitutional. And the statement goes on to say that the president and Mayorkas will continue doing their jobs to try to find solutions instead of playing these essentially political games, because Democrats, both here at the White House and in the campaign, want to remind people that they tried to get something done with Republicans on Capitol Hill. The president moved much more to the center when it comes to immigration policies than he started with in 2021. And as, of course, you remember, that package just fell through because Republicans said it simply was not enough. It did not go far enough. So I'm glad that you and Scott talked about that race in New York, because campaign sources have said that they plan to use some of that as a model to have candidate Joe Biden lean into this issue, to acknowledge that, you know, it is a problem and that he wants to try to get something done, rather than play these political games that they alluded to today.
President Biden going back to his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania today. Let's play an ad that's recently put up from the Biden campaign.
We listened to 4 years of Donald Trump talking about infrastructure because there was a lot of lip service with the previous administration. Joe Biden delivered on it. I see jobs coming to the area. I see infrastructure being fixed up.
So a bit of a split screen today. All this stuff happening in Washington, impeachment process, senators being sworn in. Yet President Biden in a swing state, my home state of Pennsylvania, making a pitch on infrastructure to labor. What's your assessment about why this messaging is coming out from the Biden campaign now?
Well, this is a state, of course, where President Biden feels the most comfortable, and the campaign is so thrilled that they have this split screen, and that Joe Biden himself was able to say and make a joke that his predecessor was busy today, as Trump, of course, deals with all of his legal issues in New York. And now you have Biden, who is making the case that he is standing with the American worker. Because when you talk about infrastructure, Robert, the president says he's really talking about new jobs. He's talking about protecting the American steel industry. He talked about competing with China and making sure there are fair practices there, and that there is going to be an investigation, and if it finds that China is not playing fairly, he's ready to triple the number of tariffs on China. And he is saying, look, remember everything that I already did for the American worker. And he talked about the Inflation Reduction Act and how that leads to more jobs within the clean steel industry. So he feels very comfortable. This is a good day for President Biden, as he's able to make his case and draw a contrast with Trump, which is what he is going to be doing from now until November.
It's fascinating because former President Trump tried to almost steal the issue of trade from the Democrats. You see the Biden White House trying to steal it back. Of course, they would argue they never really lost it, but there's certainly a competition over this issue of trade and tariffs. Weijia, Jiang, thank you so much.
You're welcome.